Hey everybody, Dr. Heldman here. Welcome back to Tech Talk Education. I'm going to keep going down the road with Mutility, I promise, because I want to do a little bit more with that. But I just got done preparing our classroom servers for the final time. I'm retiring and moving on to a different job. And but it got me thinking about Windows Server and how very, very important it is. And so I want to take a couple, 2, 3 movies, whatever it takes, to talk to you a little bit about Windows Server 2022 and how that works. And we'll get that installed today, and then we'll go through a little bit of Active Directory setup on the next video. So let's get started. This should be a lot of fun, very informative. So what I did here was I went and I Googled for a Windows Server 2022 evaluation, and I was led to this place, the Microsoft Evaluation Center. This is Server 2022. It's the latest and greatest. And you can see if I look down here, I can get some free downloads. I could try Windows Server on Azure. Now, so Windows Server is a big deal. It's a big product. It has the ability to talk to hundreds of thousands of users across a wide geographic array of countries, cities, locations. So there's a lot to it. And so learning Azure is really good, because if you're running Windows Server on Azure, you don't have to have Windows Server in a data center. It may not be cheaper. It's going to be easier because it is maintained. So you have the ability to try it on Azure, which is something that I think you should know. I do think you need to get a lot of experience with Azure. You also need to know Windows Server. So it might be better off to just try it locally first and then come back to it and see if you can get it working on Azure. You could also create a virtual machine in Azure, and that's a VM. It's just like using Oracle VirtualBox, but it's on the Azure cloud instead. We're going to download the ISO, and then you could also download this VHD. So that is a virtual hard drive, and what it is it's a prepackaged container for Windows Hyper-V, so you could use it that way instead. So you click the download, and here's what you get. And you get the choice of an ISO, which is what we're going to use to install. Remember that if you watched my Ubuntu movie, we did a Ubuntu ISO installation. And ISO means that you're going to go through a wizard to get all of the steps accomplished, whereas you could download an appliance which is already created for you. Here's the hypervisor, the Windows Hyper-V, Windows Hyper-V download. You can try it on Azure, and you can create a VM in Azure as well. So I downloaded this. So if I select downloads, I've already got it here. Let me show you what I do. So I create a folder called software, and then I have Windows Server 2022. I've already downloaded it here, and you can see that it's called Server Evaluation. It's for 64-bit computers, and it's English ISO. And I don't know what FRE stands for. It must be some sort of a code that they use to designate that it's, you have a certain time to evaluate it or whatever. I really don't know. Anyway, so that's what I did there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to run over. I'm going to minimize this, and we're going to run over to Oracle VirtualBox right here. Now you remember that there are 3 steps for installing this software. I happen to have an Oracle VirtualBox group called Normal, and I don't want you to see stuff that's inside there because it'll confuse you if you're seeing all these different VMs sitting out there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and select I'm going to move to group, but I have to install this thing first. So let's do that. So I'm going to click New, and I'm going to call this Windows Server 2022. I'm going to put it in a folder other than my C drive. I don't like filling up my C drive, so I'm going to make it D:/, VirtualBox VMs Windows Server 2022, and you can see that I did an older version of this earlier. I'll select this folder. I'm going to select the ISO image, so I click the drop down here and go to Other, and then I go to Software, and I grab this ISO right here, Software Windows Server 2022 ISO. Now the ISO gives you some edition choices, and this is interesting. So if you click this drop down, it queries the ISO and it sees that you can install 2022 Standard Edition. This is core. This will not have the GUI with it, so you'll be using PowerShell to install everything, which might be okay, but they call the GUI now, they've changed the name to Desktop Experience, and they're going along with the whole Linux type thing where you can have the choice of a Linux desktop. So in this case, they're saying, do you want a desktop? So this is Server 2022 Standard with desktop. There's another version of Server. It's called Data Center. You can get Data Center Core. These are all evaluation editions, or Data Center Desktop. I'm going to go with Standard Desktop. I'm going to skip the unattended installation. What does that mean? Well, Windows has had this for a while. You can create what is called an unattended file, and you answer all the questions for the installation, and then you make the installation obey the unattended file. It's an XML file. And what this is saying is we're not going to use this. We're just going to go with a native install. So then I click Next. I'm going to give quite a bit of RAM to this thing, so I'm going to give 16 gig to this thing because I can. I've got 192 gig in the machine. Give whatever you can. The more you can give, the better off it's going to run. And I'm going to dedicate at least 3 CPUs to it. Now, I'm not going to be running this with other VMs, so the fact that I'm dedicating quite a bit of RAM and CPU to it is fine. If I were in a virtualized lab where I had 3 or 4 machines going on, I might want to reconsider it. I purposely outfitted this computer with 192 gig so that I could do lab videos and things like that. I'll click Next. Now the disk size is 50. That might be a little small. I'm going to jack this up to 200 gig just to make sure we've got enough space for it. It'll live with 50 or 100, but you're better off giving it a little more, especially if you're going to install applications on it. You get a summary here. I'll click Finish. That's phase 1. Now you can see where I put it in this normal folder here. I'm going to create a new group. So I'm going to right-click this Server 2022, move to Group, New, and I'm going to call this group. You can see it there. Now I can inflate this. You've got a new group. I click it, right-click it, and select Rename Group. And I'm going to call this Server 2022. Okay, so I've got that. Now we've got 3 steps to go through. If we're using an ISO file with Oracle VirtualBox, we have to go through 3 steps. So the first step is the blue star. We create the machine. Next, we go in and I highlight it and I go to Settings. So it's New, Settings, Start. And it's in kind of a good order here. So we go to Settings now. Now, you guys have been through this with you before. The VirtualBox is a vertical row of menu options, these buttons. And with each section, you have 1 or more tabs like this. So in the case of General, we have the Basic tab. And you could do with Advanced. I might want to turn on, for example, Bidirectional. The reason that's handy is if you're getting a command off the web on your regular OS and you want to copy it into the guest OS or vice versa, bidirectional will help you do that. You can also drag and drop. You could key in a description if you wanted to, and you can turn on disk encryption if you want to. Under System, this is weird. I don't like this. I wish Oracle would change this. They have floppy enabled, which is not a good idea. I guess it's okay because we don't have a floppy, so it would just bypass that anyway. It would say, hey, I don't see a floppy. But I'm going to uncheck it, and I'm going to move hard disk up in the first boot order on optical in the second. Under Processor, I just check to make sure it's got 3 CPUs dedicated to it. I can enable these if your machine allows hardware extensions on your virtualized environment. That's great. And then acceleration, we've got that turned on. So everything's good there. Under display, it's getting 128 meg of video RAM, and that's fine. But you'll notice here under remote display, we could redirect the display to port 3389, which is Windows Remote Desktop Protocol. So you could remote into this machine if you had this enabled as well. And then we could record everything we're doing on the machine as well. Storage is showing, what it's doing is it's saying I am emulating a SATA controller. So it's all software, but we're emulating a SATA controller. And the first thing we have is Windows Server Virtual Disk Image, a VDI. That's the thing that we just got done creating with the new button. And then there's our CD, the server evaluation software. So that looks good. Audio, you can leave it on if you want. If you were going to play, say, YouTube through it or, something like that. Generally, I turn that off. And for the most part, when we're talking about servers, we really don't have audio enabled per se. Network is important. So you remember that there's a couple of things we're interested in. If there's NAT, that stands for Network Address Translation. And what that means is I'm going to stop at my network card and I'm going to say, hey, Mr. Network Card, would you go get something for me? And they'll be like, hey, okay, talk to the hands, stand right here. I'll go get it for you and bring it back. That's essentially NAT. It's translating your internal address to an external address so you can go get something done. The alternative would be what's called bridged adapter. And what this is doing is sharing your internal network adapter with your computer. So both of them are using the network adapter. My advice is to go with NAT if you can. And if it doesn't work for some reason, try bridged and see if that fixes it. Now, NAT in later versions of Oracle VirtualBox has been working great, so I don't think you're going to need that, but if you do, give it a try. Serial ports is kind of funny. They have 4 serial ports. Really, why? A serial port is a very, very old thing. So if I had like a Cisco 2600 router and it had a serial port I had to use to connect to it, maybe I would enable that, or a modem or something like that. But honestly, not so much today. Everything's USB, and you can see the USB 3 is enabled, which is great. And then we have shared folders and user interface. I click OK. That's step 2. So step 1 is the blue new button, which creates the VM, creates the VDI. Settings sets up everything, and you can see all the settings right here, everything that we did here. And then we're going to start the ISO. Now what this is going to do is start the installation software going. Now Windows Server is going to take a minute or two to install, so I might wind up having to pause the movie as we get it going, and I'm going to bring the window up here a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see. Now this is about all of the wizard you're going to get. There's only 2 or 3 things involved with the wizard, so I've got it set for the English language, which is fine. Click Next, and then Install Now, and that's about it. There's like one other button, but I'm going to go ahead and put this on pause until we get to the next step. There we are. And you can see that it's showing you that you have 22 standard evaluation. It does not say core. So the giveaway here is if it says desktop experience, you know you are looking at the GUI. And I can widen this out so you can see that. If it says desktop experience, that's the GUI. If it does not say desktop experience, that's the core. And then you have standard or data center. I'm going to go standard GUI right here and click Next. And we'll see what we get. This is called the EULA, the End User License Agreement. I recommend that you read this because there are certain things that Microsoft is holding you to. So it's worth your while to read and understand the EULA. And you get clear to the top of the bottom. You can see it gives you a EULA ID, End User License Agreement ID. And I'm going to accept and click Next. Now we have the choice of, we've got an upgrade tile here. I don't have Windows Server on here. If I did already, I might go with the upgrade because what it will do is upgrade the software but leave the files and the settings and the applications intact. But in this case, I don't have anything, so I'm going to click this bottom tile. Now, if you did have something before, like let's say you went and you bought a computer and it has a couple of hard drives in it, and it had something else installed on it, it might show you 3 or 4 bars here. What I do is I click them and then I click delete, and that'll delete all of those. What you're looking for is one single blue bar here with a certain amount of space, and that's what we want. We want it to be unallocated because we're going to let Windows allocate the space for us. You might think that you need to click the format button, but you really don't, because it'll automatically format it for you. So I'll click next. And now we're in wait mode, so I'm going to put you on hold until the installation is done. Okay, just checking back in with you, and you can see here that it's done copying all the files, it's installing updates, it's almost done installing, and I'm going to put you on hold temporarily just a little bit more while it gets going, and it's been probably about 10 or 15 minutes. Now it says it needs to restart, and so you click restart now and it'll actually restart the machine for you, no problem there. And so if in some cases when you're working with an ISO and you have a CD-ROM in there, even though it's the second boot order device, Ubuntu does this. You'll be prompted that you have to remove the CD and then boot the machine. So you'll have to go into Oracle VirtualBox, check the settings, undo the CD, and then come back out and start the machine, and it'll start for you. But in the case of Windows Server, it doesn't care about that. It's fine. And so we can just leave it sitting there. It's not a big deal. So it's starting services. Now this is a differentiation between Windows Server and Linux Server. So Linux has services, the way that you might think of a service as being a piece of code that's doing some work for you, but it's all done with a file. So everything is file-based in Linux. And in Windows, it is not. So these services are pieces of code that are bundled into the OS. You have the ability to start and stop them, restart them, disable them, things like that. And there are services in Server. And of course, there are a lot more that are in Server than in like Windows Workstation. But Windows Workstation also has services as well. So it's something that you'll have to really get used to. How do you get to the Windows services? What do they look like? When do you need to restart them? And so there's just an art to learning all of the different factions that are involved in Windows Server and the different things that go together to make Windows Server operate. I got to tell you guys, I love Linux. I'm a Linux guy, but Windows Server is amazing. It does some amazing things, and it's able to scale so well. The Active Directory is really a great thing. It was a great invention, and it scales well. Now, the database that Active Directory uses is called X.500, and it's an open source database that is used here, and it's real light and compact. Everything's good that way, so that's a good thing. And then the protocol that's used is called LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. LDAP is what it stands for. And we'll get into that a little bit more later when we start actually installing Active Directory on this thing. Right now what we're doing is just creating a plain vanilla server. It's not a member of a domain or anything like that. All it is a standalone server sitting there running, and we have to go in and do a couple of configurations, and then we'll call this movie good, because all we want to do is we want to get to the point where we have a single server, and then we'll talk about a domain in the next movie. Now, if I were doing a password, you can see that the default username is administrator. You're going to have to remember that, and it's not admin like in Linux where it's like short. You have to spell out administrator, so you got to know how to spell. And you can create other accounts later on for you and for others and make them a member of what's called domain admins. But we'll talk about that after a while. Anyway, the password. What you want to do if you're going to have a server and you're going to install a domain, and it's not in a test environment like this, like in Oracle VirtualBox, you want to pick a very, very good, solid, very strong, probably fairly long password. something that has a combination of upper and lowercase letters, spaces, numbers, and special characters. One way to do it is to think about a sentence that you know that other people might not know, and make that into your password, something that you can easily remember, but that's also very, very strong. In this case, since I'm using it in a lab environment, I'm just going to go with welcome1, which is the default that I use right there. See it? Cap W number 1. I would never do this in a production server environment, and click Finish. Okay, next thing you need to know is that logging on, if you hit Control, Alt, and Delete right now, you're going to Control, Alt, and Delete your Windows machine if you're on a Windows machine. So that's not going to work. In order to log on to this server, you have to press Control, Alt, and Delete to unlock. But we're running this inside an Oracle VirtualBox, so what we have to do is click Input, Keyboard, Insert, Control, Alt, and Delete right there. So I'll click that, and it'll log on for me. I'll type in my password of welcome1, and then we're going to be looking at the Windows interface. Now this is Windows Server. It doesn't look any different, or not very different, from Windows 10, Windows 11. So that's a good thing. The desktop experiences, as you might imagine, takes up a lot of RAM and a lot of CPU. So if you know your way around PowerShell, and if you don't want to have to worry about this GUI taking up extra cycles on the machine, the thing that you want to do, I'm going to click Yes here. The thing that you want to do is you want to go with Core. But I don't know enough about PowerShell to feel like I could actually manage an entire server. So I'm going to just stick with the desktop experience for now. Now, so this interface here, this is called Server Manager here, and it's been around a while. It took me a while to get used to it. You didn't used to have this. You had something else, but I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years ago, Microsoft came up with a Server Manager, and I'm just now getting used to it. And so what do? They're like, okay, well, we're going to go with what's called the Windows Admin Center here, and they're going to put it all into a browser-based app, which is pretty cool. They're just letting you know right now. There's no additional cost. I'm not going to go with this right now, but that's a warning to you. Hey, man, at some point we're going to bundle in the Windows Admin Center, and I kind of imagine Server Manager is going to go away. So I'll kill this box. Okay, now this is Server Manager. This is very interesting. So at the top, you have a flag. You're going to have to pay attention to these notifications, especially when we start creating a domain controller, a DC. You're going to have some flags there that you've got to pay attention to. You've got your Manage, and you've got Tools. And so once you install other software, or what they call a role in Windows Server, it'll show up here, and then you can manage it here. But right now we don't have any roles. Also, please remember that this is so big that, you know, you could have, we're going to talk about a forest later, but you could have 3, 4, 5, 6, a dozen forests, all of which have domain controllers in them in separate domains across a huge geographically diverse area, 30, 50 countries, 500,000 users spread around. So this can get really large, but in our case, we only have one server. So you click Local Server. What it's going to do is get you information about this particular server that you're looking at right now. It is in a work group. It has not joined a domain yet. We're going to create a domain on the next movie, and its name is really funky. So let's talk about server names real quick. What I would not do is I would not name it SQL Server 1, because if a hacker gets in and they can see the names of the machines, that's a dead giveaway. Hey, that's got a database on it. I'm going to go do something with that. Or DNS1 or DHCP1. That's not a good idea. But what you should do is come up with a way of naming the machines in such a way that they are cleverly disguised, if you know what I'm saying. Like, you cannot figure out what it is they do, but you know what they do, and that's a good way to do it. Now, since this is in a lab, I'm just going to go ahead and name this thing. I'm going to click that and go Change. And I'm just going to go with a theme. when I was reburning the classroom computers at the end of the school year this year, we have 4 servers there, and I went with the theme of The Simpsons, so we had Bart and Lisa. But in this case, I think I'm going to go with Disney, so this first machine is going to be named Mickey, like that, and I'll click OK. As soon as you make that change, you have to reboot the computer. Now, I want to tell you something. When you're getting ready to promote a Windows server to be a domain controller, that name has got to be solid because it cannot change once you turn it into a domain controller. So make sure you're settled on the name that you're going to use and get it changed before you convert it into a DC. Otherwise, you're going to have some interesting issues. So I'll restart the machine. And we're going to look at just a couple more things that you want to make sure you check on initial startup mode. I'm really glad I gave this thing 16 gig of RAM. I understand that you may not have as much RAM in your computer as I do. I purposely put this in because it's designed to be a video/lab machine on my personal computer here, but you may not have that. But try and give it at least 8, at least a couple of CPUs if you can. The more you can give to it, the better off you're going to be. So I'm going to go Input, Keyboard, Control-Alt-Delete, and I will type in my password. And then we will wait for Server Manager to come up. It takes it just a minute for it to load. Oftentimes what I like to do is I like to minimize Server Manager. You can see that the license is valid for 180 days. Server and Manager takes a minute for it to come up, so that was one of the annoyances I had with it. But now that I've learned how to use it a lot better, I like it. And what I do is I just go ahead and minimize it so I can see other things happening on the screen. Now I'm going to go to Local Server, and it's going to give me a report on the server. And you can see that the name has changed. The other thing I want to check is it's in Pacific time zone, and I am not. That's the default on Windows Server. So you're going to want to make sure you check that. And what I'm going to do is change the time zone to Mountain right here and click OK. And of course, you'll change it to whatever your time zone is. And it doesn't show up here just yet. The other thing you want to check is updates only. What it's going to do is download updates. And we haven't checked for that. So if you click download updates right now, it'll bring out the update menu. And you could have it check for updates. We don't need to do that right now. But what I would recommend is next time when we get ready to do our domain controller, I would make sure that it has updates installed. And then finally, what we want to check, we're going to have to change this IP address. Right now, it's getting an IP address from DHCP. You can see here it says assigned by DHCP with IP version 6 enabled. That's all fine. Except with a server, we don't want a DHCP address. We want a hardwired, what they call a static IP address. So we're going to have to make sure we handle that as well. And finally, if you wanted to get into this machine using RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, and on port 3389, you would need to enable Remote Desktop. Right now, it's not enabled, so you could not get into it using RDP from your Windows computer. So what we're going to do is it's okay to leave that disabled now. Just be aware that that's a thing. Okay, that's all I've got. We've done a lot of work here. I hope you enjoyed the movie. And the next time we meet, what we're going to do is promote this guy to a domain controller. It's called a DC. Talk to you in the next movie. Have a great day, and thanks for listening. And please like and subscribe. Guys, I don't have comments enabled yet. If I'm being honest with you, I'm not sure how to enable them. But I'm going to Google this and get comments enabled because I want to see your comments as well. So please like and subscribe to my movies. I really appreciate it. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.